Get comfy. Hello, Zoom. We love you, Zoom. Okay. We are in for a treat, another one. So many treats this week. This is our own Deesha Philyaw is going to be talking to us about writing quickies. I'm just going to let her explain what that means. Take it away, Deesha.
So I told Sheila just a few minutes ago that when I gave her this, the description for this craft talk months ago, I don't know that I understood that I just had an hour. So I was like, oh, we'll talk about flash fiction and flash nonfiction and sex and so it's going to really be a crash course. Any piece of what we're going to talk about today could be its own more in-depth conversation. And we're going to do some writing today, but you're not, even though it's flash, it's not going to be anything I don't think that is a fully finished piece, but just some things to get you started that you can pick up and finish later on. So we're talking, as I said, about flash fiction and nonfiction, which I think are perfect forms for capturing powerful and provocative tales and truth. And explore some entry points into sexy flash, or is it flashy sex, including elements of play and dialogue. So I wanted to start with this quote about what flash is. And you can, people have so many different definitions of what it is, even definitions about what word count makes flash. I've heard everything from 4 words to 1,000 words. So anywhere in between there, you're working with flash. The short story that I read in its entirety to you all last night, Not Daniel, that's considered flash because it is under 1,000 words. I like this definition because it's visual. Dorothy Parker said, brevity is the soul of lingerie. A flash story is the lingerie itself, an invitation to come hither, a promise, a hint. So I'm going to talk a tiny bit more about flash and also about writing about sex for folks who think about, very serious writing, should we be writing about sex? Does it count as serious? That kind of thing. So this is what Garth Greenwell had to say about that question about whether or not serious writers, literary writers, if sex is in bounds for us to play with. And a lot of the quotes and things that I share, I'm going to drop them in the chat for folks in Zoom at the end. And you can see the context for these things. And Sheila, I think we can figure out a way to get it to everybody else. Okay. A lot of the resources that I'll share in those links you won't see today. As I mentioned, I started big. I had a lot that I wanted to share, but we have an hour. So these are resources where you can keep looking. And one is the Guardian article where he wrote about this, that how sex is not only okay for us and totally in limits for us, that it's uniquely useful for us as writers. And it's a powerful means, not just of revealing character, exploring relationships, but of asking the largest questions about human beings. It's a crucible of humanness, which I thought was a great line. So the question isn't so much why one would write about sex as why one would write about anything else. So I thought that was a nice challenge. Like, what if you only wrote about sex for like a whole year? And then I have a that's based on this essay by Audre Lorde called Uses of the Erotic as Power. And so I had the challenge of looking at my whole presentation and thinking, if I could only share one thing with you, what would it be? And it would be this idea of the erotic as a source of power and information. So when I think about writing about sex and intimacy, I think about it in this really expansive way, and it's informed by Lorde's view of the erotic as a source of power and information. She distinguishes it from pornography, which is, she viewed pornography as just sensation without feeling, whereas the erotic emphasizes sensation and feeling. It is a measure between the beginnings of our sense of self and the chaos of our strongest feelings. Excuse me. It is an internal sense of satisfaction, which once we have experienced it, we know we can aspire. And one of the things she goes on to say that I think is really important about this is that she viewed the fact that we often conflate the erotic and the pornographic and limit it to the bedroom as an intentional sort of status quo keeping sort of thing, that if we recognize this erotic power that we all have and that it's bigger than the bedroom and then it's bigger than sexual acts, that is actually how we show up as powerful beings in the world, that suddenly people who don't often think of themselves as having powerful would realize how powerful we really were and how powerful we really are, and that, you know, we could then overturn society. So she, you know, she believed that it was not coincidental that we have this really small definition of the erotic. So in this essay, she advocates for this much larger transformative view of the erotic. And finally, back to our definition of flash. It's a short form, but just because it's short, it can't just be like a description or a sketch, as Lynn Kuntz says here. And in his definition, he says, what I look for is rich language or a fresh voice, and I want to feel a connection to the story and characters. The writing needs to evoke some kind of emotion, and that can be anything: grief, shock, humor. At the end of the piece, I want to have a sense of wow. So that distinguishes flash from just, you know, a piece of, in a piece of flash, fiction or nonfiction, you have a self-contained story. Okay, so let's see, how are we doing on time? Pretty good. All right, so what's going to happen next is I'm going to read a story and then give you all a prompt that goes with that story. And then we're going to do that a second time. So it's going to be with two stories, one nonfiction, one flash nonfiction, one flash fiction. And then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So as I mentioned, you'll get started on these prompts, but you're not going to have a lot of time to finish. All right, so the first story, excuse me, I want to stop sharing my screen. Oh, you know what? I don't have to do that. I can just read it from my phone. Sorry. All right. 1 second. And for folks on Zoom, I'm keeping an eye on the chat if you have any questions or comments. Okay, our first flash piece is going to be flash fiction, and it's from a site called Smoke Long Quarterly. It's a publication that publishes flash fiction and nonfiction. Let's see if I can get it to open up. Here we go. And it's called Smoke Long because sometimes flash is called smoke long because it takes about as long to read as it takes to smoke a cigarette. So smoke long fiction or smoke long stories, sudden stories or sudden fiction, short microfiction. Those are some of the names that you might hear. And I apologize, Chatham Wireless is asking me for password. Okay, sorry, this was all lined up. But if you want to go to Smoke Long, it's a story called Metallic that I'm going to read. I'm sorry, not Metallic, it's a different one. I had several chosen. It was not Metallic, it was, 1 second. Listening. So Smoke Long Quarterly, Listening. My neighbor and her ex reunited at all hours. At first, I listened. I kept my couch against the shared wall, the one they reunited against. It amazed me how they transitioned so quickly from fighting to playing, and then from playing to pinning each other against the wall. Sometimes it would get quiet and it seemed they had finished in a modest way, but it was always just the quiet before the storm. I liked the commotion of the storm, but I disliked it too because it signaled the end for a while, and then the TV would come on, which brought me neither comfort nor insight. I lived alone in an old schoolhouse converted into lofts. The units were supposed to be cool and trendy, but the walls were poorly insulated, so cold air and the neighbors' noises were part of the deal. I didn't know my neighbor. I only gathered her situation through fragments. She wasn't around much, and when I heard her door swing open, I'd run to my door and press my eye against the peephole, but I had yet to catch more than a back of a head, a slice of face. I too had a person. I had had a person in the recent past. I had had a person who was the first man with whom I ever tried. He claimed I'd never know how to satiate him and that I was just going through a phase. He said there were things I didn't understand. He said all of this in a kind way. But I am a man, I said. I'll get better. It's more than that, he said, and then changed the subject to what I paid for rent. I wasn't very good with women either. I was uneven. I'd start slowly and then speed up quickly, skipping steps. I'd get so worked up and I'd be going so fast, and then I'd come to an abrupt stop to keep from finishing. An intermission would be a generous description. But once I'd start up again, I'd have no choice but to cross the finish line and lie in my own sweat, apologizing. Then she would say, "You're fine," or "That was nice," or "We'll figure it out," or "It's really not about duration." I felt sad for everyone that she had to say those things. My neighbor and her ex were at it again. This time the fight seemed serious. "Why don't you listen to me? Why don't you ask me how I feel and just listen to me instead of telling me I'm angry? This is why we're not together." "You are angry." "You're angry." "I'm not angry." "You are angry." Then they reunited, and soon after they started, the sounds trailed off, and just like that, I was alone. It was frustrating to say the least. I threw my hands up and said, "What can you do?" Because what could I do? Knock on the door and ask them to please return to our shared wall? I decided to make myself useful, so I loaded up my laundry basket and carried it down to the laundry room. When I got down there, the light was off and the door was closed. I heard faint voices. Ear to door, I determined it was indeed my neighbor and her ex. I listened for a while, but I didn't have any clean socks, so I opened the door and flipped on the light. She snorted and he grinned. They both apologized as they pulled up their pants. Neither she nor he looked how their voices sounded. He was a little heavy with a receding hairline, though he was holding on to his 20s. She had a freckled nose and a pointy chin. "You're fine," I said, and then under my breath added, "Don't leave on my behalf," and I meant it. One Sunday, the neighbor and her ex were watching football, and the ex was laughing about the length of some Bears players' arms. I guess they were comically long or comically short. I was right there on the other side of the wall, drinking coffee that tasted mint flavor because earlier I'd been going to town on a box of Thin Mints, and I discovered in the back of my freezer. My ex sent me a text saying he was stopping by. I told him I was busy, but he showed up anyway. We reunited on the couch against the neighbor's wall. I found a rhythm I'd never found before. He told me I'd gotten better and that maybe we should get back together for a couple of weeks, a trial run. I figured I didn't understand precision well enough to be with women. I didn't have a good eye for detail. I wasn't very patient. I had clumsy fingers. Coloring within the lines caused me great stress as a child. We lay on the couch sweating. "Where'd you learn that?" he said. "It's just about finding rhythm," I said. "No," he said, "it's more than that. You grew ears." "You're such a know-it-all," I said, sitting up and wagging a finger. My ex laughed, and then I laughed, and then a familiar cackle joined us. We started reuniting again, the cackle morphing into guttural sounds, but coming at us until we could no longer hear ourselves. And that was by Listening by Michael Don. All right, so here's your prompt. Oh, I see, I was logged out. Sheila, does this have to be connected to Chatham to do the Zoom? Is that why? I didn't think I'd logged out. Yeah, just back to the slides. Like I don't know why like it actually closed out. It's asking me again. Okay, we're back. All right. I hope it stays. Okay, so if you want to check out that story, that's the URL. And here's your prompt. And we're going to take just 10 minutes. So I said you'll get started on something. And I'd like you to write a story that involves 3 people. At least one is an eavesdropper on a sexual conversation or situation. Use dialogue to reflect the characters' moods and the dynamics between them. And for this one, I'd like you to aim for a playful tone. And I'm going to leave this up. And I'll set the timer so you don't have to worry about time, but just see what you can get done in 10 minutes. Maybe all you get done is the dialogue, and that's fine. So would anyone in the room or in the chat want to share a line or a phrase or something that you found especially delicious? Delicious. Nope. Anyone want to share anything about their process? Are we stuck? Oh, thank you. Please come on up. Can you come up? I'm closing mine because I don't want you to see it.
Okay, hello. A couple sentences. This is about a girl in high school, a residential, so she's living in a dorm. This is how Suhasini learned about sex. She learned about different kinds of sex: vanilla, not vanilla, quiet, wordy. She preferred the wordy kind. Her roommate was into instructions. It was easier to take notes.
Thank you. Now that the ice has been broken, I was going to use another metaphor, but I won't. Anyone else? Come on up, Lux.
Just like one little line. They say that dorm walls are thin. They are. There's this unspoken assumption that what happens in dorm halls stays in dorm halls. Dorms are not Vegas, though.
All right, so from both of those, you could see the promise. You can see a lot of potential there. And so hopefully you've got something to work with for the future. All right, any questions before we shift to some flash nonfiction? Okay. And this time I'm just going to read from my laptop so that I don't mess anything up. This story is from a publication called Brevity, which I think I've talked about in our fiction workshop. And Brevity publishes exclusively flash nonfiction of 750 words or less. And they publish across all sorts of topics. And sometimes they have special issues, like they'll have a gender issue or they'll have a race issue or something like that. But otherwise, they're open for submissions on all subjects as long as it's nonfiction under 750 words. They also publish a lot of craft essays. And so I highly recommend this as a resource for any writer because there's some really terrific craft essays. And sometimes they're craft essays that go with the stories in Brevity, and other times they're unrelated to a particular piece. So it's just a really great way to keep up on craft. So the story that I'm gonna read is called Bruised, and I'll just leave it at that. I cut off every curl, every nappy thread that would forever belong to him unless Even now, when I lie alone at night and close my eyes, I can feel his cool fingertips tracing through my scalp. Until he clutches his fist, my strands tangle around his fingers, forcing my head back. His mouth suspended above my lips. Kiss, or was it a bite? I had never dated a white guy before. I had never considered not wearing a weave before, but he loved my hair, so I tried him on along with my afro. My natural hair would usually frighten men away, and I believe I actually heard my father scream once when he saw me afro unveiled. Feeling beautiful without the artificial additives was empowering. But what does empowerment look like hung against a Black background? Perhaps it's similar to that day when you first take off your training wheels, or when you slip your bra through the sleeve of your shirt upon arriving home, or the first time you say no without explanation. I believe they call this liberation. I think I love my first white boyfriend for this reason alone. My friend Khalil asked me for a number, the number of white guys I had dated that viewed me as an object of exoticism. I stopped for a moment. A long moment, for I had never considered this to be part of my narrative. This contemplation was not a result of ignorance, but confidence, a confidence in my capability to recognize this type of purveyor immediately and never fall victim to such. I told Khalil, a few. He laughed loudly. I'm sure there have been more than a few. When my lover and I dressed to go out for dinner, we mustn't forget our armor. I think I may need to apply 3 layers to his one. We never know what we may encounter, but it certainly depends on which neighborhood we are braving. There are always those who assume that we are not a couple, and I am most definitely not his wife because Black women aren't wives. If we're on the Upper East Side, the old white couples glare, eyes consumed with evil. In Harlem, the Black men shake their heads in shame and shout across Lenox, "You all right, sis?" The Black women either pity you or smile encouragingly with an applauding wink. And then there's always the liberal white couple downtown that says you look like a celebrity couple and tell you how cute your children would be with raised voices so that everyone can hear how progressive they are. I Googled Black porn. Tight Black girl pounded. Black whore punished. I Googled white porn. Beautiful blonde amateurs, when girls play. 2 kittens make sweet love. It is difficult to spot bruises on Black skin, but when I look closely, I can see your blues. I met a beautiful foreign man a while back. He was kind, gentle, and had a peaceful demeanor. He had long, cool blonde hair and olive oil eyes. We met at a hookah bar where he told me he was visiting from Vienna for 4 weeks. He had recently arrived in New York and wanted to hear live jazz music. We exchanged numbers so that I could send him information about great places to visit in the city. I met him again 4 weeks later, hours before he was to depart and return to Austria. I asked him about his time in the city and what he had done during his adventures. He smiled brightly. I assumed he had seen the Statue of Liberty and eaten hot dogs with mustard on Broadway. But no, he beams that he had sex with a Black woman for the first time and he had never felt so white. I've always associated Black women with wild sex, but I've always been told Black women don't give head. Anyway, both weren't true. God bless America. It's difficult to differentiate between the impact of a kiss and a bite. Both can impose intense pressure and cause persistent numbness. Both can induce a rupturing of blood vessels beneath the skin. Some refer to this as a bruise, or maybe you call this a passion mark. And that's by a writer named Sacha Bonnet. Okay, so that's where you can see Bruised. And now my prompt for you is to write a flash nonfiction story that challenges a myth about sex. Your tone can be serious or playful. And let's see, we'll again take 10 minutes. Any questions before we get started? Okay, all right. All right, that's time. Start with Zoom. Anybody in the Zoom room want to share? Okay, I'll keep an eye on, oh, wait. Oh, there's one in the chat. Okay, I will read it. From Anna. When I was 17, I attended the bachelorette party of my brother's soon-to-be wife. We played a game, get the condom on the banana, fastest wins. My competitive nature took over and I slid that waxy sucker over the banana in mere seconds, obliterating the competition, only to have 7 Christian married women look between me and my banana with holy concern. I was a virgin, not an idiot. Make sure I didn't miss anybody. Anyone else want to share? Want to come up? All right, Rena, thank you.
Okay, I will tell you up front, I am not looking at any of you. Bondage isn't something Black women never could love. It's the only time I'm free to let go, to stop thinking, just feel, do not work. There is nothing left to reveal. Something most don't understand is the amount of trust, the buildup of anticipation, more than the acts themselves, can bring you to your knees if you can stand up. Not knowing what is coming, the tongue running down your side, 9-tails slap your thigh, a breath is sucked in. You're on the verge of coming, but you have to wait. That release will come again.
I love how it's like not even noon and we're talking about this stuff. Anyone else? Yes, come on up. Okay, who said uh-oh? Oh, yeah.
Okay, I tried to be funny here. Okay, they say that when 2 bodies lay horizontally, height doesn't matter. Height most definitely matters during sex. I'm 5'10" and he is 5'5", a Jewish boy from Brooklyn with fat lips and a fat dick. But when we lay in bed, the parts lay flat, the parts do not line up. It doesn't matter when you're walking in flats and he has lifts in his shoes. The 5 inches don't matter when you're strolling down St. Mark's Place on your way to the Eclectic Cafe on Avenue A with its Christmas lights and tiki torches. 5 inches don't matter when he surprises you with dessert, orders a vegan chocolate brownie a la mode while you're in the bathroom to surprise you for your birthday. 5 inches don't matter when he pays the check and says, let's go back to my place and smoke a joint. They don't matter when he opens the cab door for you, makes sure you have crushed and not cubed ice in your Diet Coke, or when he tells you you're beautiful. But those 5 inches matter when you're naked, and matter when his erect penis is 5 inches closer to the ground and you have to get on hands and knees, not just knees, to suck his dick. The hands callous easily.
Thank you. All right, we have one in the chat from Mary. Porn shows virgins losing it, but none of them bleed for the first time. None like me. None of them show the tearing, the feeling of being ripped open. None of them represent the hot curling iron entering and exiting and pumping. Maybe it's just me, but I didn't beg for more. I begged for a shower. I begged for ibuprofen to sew up the pain. The first time shown in porn is a misprint. Anyone else? Come on up, Mia.
The best way is not to come up here with your Crocs squeaking like that. My gosh. Okay, so I try to be funny with this. So I'm going a little full frontal here. Forgive me. I didn't apologize. Oh, wait, yes, I did. We're not going to. Okay, let's just go ahead and read, shall we? All right. Before you have sex, to the ladies who are interested in penises, look before it goes in. Note that this is happening in the dark. I didn't specify that. When you're ready for your first time and you're excited, like, oh my God, it's happening. You don't realize that the man you're with, you never seen him naked. 1, never seen him naked. Or 2, you never seen his lower half before. Then the nerves kick in as the clothes fall off and you're in the bed, ready for liftoff. The countdown started as soon as you heard the wrapper of the condom being ripped apart. 10, 9, 8. It's not gonna hurt, right? You decide to ask the last second as the man wrapped it before he taps it. I'll be gentle, he says. 7, 6, 5. You feel it and you know what's about to come next as he kisses you. 2, then it happens. 1. Motherfucker. What the fuck? This shit. I could not believe I listened to him. No one gives you an actual one-on-one session of what not to do when you're having sex. Rule number 1, don't clench. Rule number 2, make sure you see all of the person you're trying to sleep with. And I mean all of him. And rule number 3, lube.
Isn't it amazing what we can do in 10 minutes? It's amazing. It's like almost like, better to have less time, right? I don't know. Anyone else in the chat? Anyone else in the room? Okay, let's see. So we have 6 minutes for questions. Okay. If you have questions, if you're in the room and have questions, come up. If you have a question in the chat, I'll look in the chat. I'm also going to drop the links. I did say I was going to do
Anybody here with questions? Mia.
I think this is it.
Oh, okay, all right. Sorry, I can't stand Okay, links are in the chat and Sheila will share those with the folks in the room.
Hello, friends again. So this was actually, I had a couple of questions from your reading from yesterday. I decided to ask you either in class or today. Maybe I have two, maybe three, but maybe I'll just break in between. So what compelled you to write sexy scenes in Secret Lives of Church Ladies? And how did you know you wanted to? And when did you realize you were comfortable to do it?
I don't think it's possible. Well, for me, I know it's not possible to write about women in the Black church and not write about sex. Like, it's just impossible. They just go hand in hand. I'll give you, my agent told me recently that a publisher in China wants to publish The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, but they want to take out the sex and the religion. And I'm like, it'll just be like my dedication to my children. That's in the acknowledgements. That's all that's going to be left. Like, I just think, it wasn't a conscious decision of, okay, I want to write about sex. It was, the church is obsessed with sex. Like, if you think about all the things, the rules that we learn at church, so many of them are centered around sex. If we think about all of the scandals that become public around church, they're either about money or sex, most often about sex. And the sex scandals embody all of the double standards that are, that have plagued us for so long. They embody the restrictions on women's freedoms, and the biggest one, I think, are the binaries that they force human beings into. You are either this or that. And we just know that our lives, our identities, our desires just don't always fall into one or two categories. And so those binaries end up being very harmful. And people do all sorts of things to contort themselves to try and fit in those binaries, or when they don't, try and sneak around and not, make it obvious to anyone that they don't fit in those binaries. And so to me, all of that conflict is just ripe for stories. That, like, I could write about that for the rest of my life, because there's always something there. So basically, because the church is obsessed with sex and obsessed with constricting us as sexual beings, that's the source of conflict that I'm drawn to. And I'm drawn to it because growing up, I saw those double standards. I saw the hypocrisy, and I also was personally confused. Like, I didn't know, like, if I'm not supposed to do these things or like these things or want these things, and if I do, I'm going to go to hell, but I don't want to go to hell. What do I do? Like, as a kid, we're very black and white thinkers. And so I took a lot of that to heart. I also thought that doing everything according to how the church automatically be happy. And so once I did things the right way, I married heterosexually, and I didn't have children until I was married, and I wasn't happy. So now what? And so I think in many ways, my stories are kind of the now what, like what happens when everything the church is telling you isn't serving you. So as far as being comfortable writing about it, I think it was after my mother passed away, I think a sense of my own mortality and just not feeling like I had time to waste worrying about how, if somebody was going to be uncomfortable or what people were going to think about me or whatever. I just felt like I didn't have time to worry about that stuff. So There's something in the chat. Yes, Anna says, sometimes I write a flash piece that's interesting, but lack the heart of my longer works. Do you have any tips for making shorter pieces that have more emotional impact? Excuse me. That's a really good question. I think one way is if you're working with a longer draft and you can identify, for me, often it's a line of dialogue or something else like that, the thing that you're calling that emotional heart, that line, that thing that someone says, pull that out of the longer piece and build a shorter piece around that impactful piece. Because sometimes the longer piece is what we need to write as a draft, and then revising and revising and whittling it down gets us to a shorter piece. Also, I think as we saw here today, doing timed writing, because when you only have a few minutes and not sort of indefinitely, I think we do really well when we are under that kind of pressure and we're not editing and we're not worrying about anything. It's like, can I just capture this thing that I want to capture really quickly? So I think maybe time writing and then also pulling out those really resonant lines and then rewriting with those at the heart of it. I hope that's helpful, Anna. Other questions? Cedric.
First of all, thank you. And so I just was thinking about how little sex in like the years of workshops that I had, and so I was just wondering if you had like any advice for like pitfalls that you can fall into, or any advice on the the positive side, if you had any like suggestions for writing sex like in a more vivid or not like a way that, because I think we've all read stuff like that's published that's really, really bad.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
Okay. And I wish I could remember, but there's some site that every year publishes the worst sex writing. So you guys know what not to do. I think, some of the hesitation around teaching sex or, writing workshops that involve sex is that, we don't want to harm anybody. And so I want to talk about the difference between harm and discomfort. I think it's okay for people to be uncomfortable. And then that becomes kind of a personal thing, a decision that someone has to make. But, we don't want to harm anyone. And so what I've done in the past is, for longer workshops, is, acknowledging that some of these things may make people feel uncomfortable. But we, talk about ways to be respectful. We look at examples of writing that's gratuitous, just sex for the sake of sex, or, really violent imagery. And it's like, no, you're not going to use this workshop to do that kind of stuff. But really thinking about sex as it's described, where was it? Yeah, this sort of Garth Green. So I think, like, what are your guiding principles? Like setting the tone. You can set the tone by having some examples, either of the writing itself or, quotes like this to say, this is what we're aiming for today. You as a writer, might want to do something different, but in here today, because, if you're the workshop leader, you're trying to keep everybody, okay, that this is what we're going to do. And then, build in space for people to kind of lean into their discomfort. Like, if something is making you uncomfortable, writing what you can stop. If we're doing X over here, if you need to stop and write why you think, what is this making you feel and why is it uncomfortable? Like, honor that, listen to that. Don't feel like you have to push through it, because you don't. I had someone, when I was teaching a broader workshop on writing about sex, and she said that she had to leave because she said it just is hitting too close to home. And I didn't ask what did that mean. I just respected that, and she left. So knowing that some people may have to excuse themselves either altogether or for part of the time, no one has to ever, explain why they get up to take care of themselves. That's something I say all the time in workshops, whether it's about sex or not. If you need to get up or leave to take care of yourself, take care of yourself. So kind of trusting people to do what they need to do for themselves. And then always making sharing optional. And sort of, not cajoling people to share, because even that, can make someone feel uncomfortable in ways we don't want them to. I emphasize in most of my workshops, but certainly the sex ones, that I'm more interested in people using that time for their own explorations in their writing and experimentation and play, and that sharing is sort of like after, it's like if we get a chance and if people are just excited to do it, but really like making sure that that people are having their own personal journey, that they're not in any obligation to share with the group. So those are some of the ways that I've approached it. And then just as always, giving people good examples. It wasn't easy to find examples of sex related or flash, nonfiction or fiction, but I did find some, and that's, those are the links I wanted to share. And I think there may have been one more link that I may or may not have shared, but if it's not in that list, I'll make sure everyone has it, that has like a more exhaustive list. At Smoke Long Quarterly, they did a series of sexy flash, so make sure you have that. Reading good examples, that's it. Anything else? Is that time? All right, thank you all.